The cardboard box labeled fragile nearly slipped out of my hands as I walked up the porch steps. Howell, my only son, stood in the doorway of his house with his hands in his pockets, smiling that peculiar smile I'd always recognized as sincere. It was a smile of duty, not of joy. "Mom, let me help." He reached down and picked up the box. "Is this the last one?" I nodded, looking back at the small truck where the driver was slamming the back door shut. All my possessions now fit into 12 boxes. 6 decades of life squeezed between cardboard walls. "I sold the rest with the house," I said, walking up behind him. "The new owners liked the furniture." He was silent, and I felt a pang of disappointment. Howell had never been particularly fond of his childhood home, but I'd hoped that now that it was sold for good, he'd show some sentimentality. The suburb of Winchester, the quiet street of maple trees, the green fence that Albert and I painted every 3 years. Now it all belonged to a young couple with a child. "Laurel!" Howell shouted as he entered the house. "Mom's here!" Laurel emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. My sister-in-law, a slender woman with a sharp chin and high eyebrows, always reminded me of a wary bird. "Hello, Pearl," she said with a strained smile. "Welcome. Howell, show Mom to her room, and I'll finish lunch." I followed my son up the narrow staircase. Howell and Laurel's two-story house seemed oddly planned to me. The stairs were unexpectedly steep, and on the second floor the ceiling dropped in places for no apparent reason. "Right here." Howell opened the door to a small room at the end of the hallway. It was a guest bedroom decorated in impersonal beige colors. No personal effects, no pictures, just a bed, a dresser, and a small table by the window. "Bathrooms across the hall," he added, setting the box on the floor. "Make yourself comfortable, and I'll help you move the rest of your stuff." When he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in a long day, I let myself truly comprehend what had happened. I'd sold the house I'd lived in for almost 50 years. The house where Albert and I had raised Howell, where every corner held memories, where his old school books and toys were still in the closets, where the apple orchard we had planted still grew in the garden. Albert died 3 months ago, quietly, in his sleep, as he had lived, without too much noise. Heart failure, the doctors said. His long illness had depleted our savings, and his pension was barely enough to pay the bills. "Mom, you can't live alone at your age," Howell insisted. "Sell the house, move in with us. You'll feel safer here." I resisted for 2 weeks, but deep down, I knew he was right. I'd turned 78 in May, and the neighbors were asking me more and more if I needed help with the simplest chores. I agreed, and now I was sitting in a strange room among strange walls, feeling like an intruder. In half an hour, all my boxes were carried into the room. Howell helped me unpack my clothes and put them in the dresser drawers, then apologized and went to work. He was a cybersecurity specialist and worked from home. I slowly unpacked the rest of my things, arranging the pictures on the dresser. Albert on our wedding day, Howell at graduation, the three of us on the coast. I set my husband's picture on the table by the bed and ran my finger over his smiling face. "That's a good idea, you say?" I whispered. "We'll live to see." For lunch, Laurel made some fancy quinoa salad and baked fish. The food was delicious but unfamiliar. I've always made more traditional meals. "What do you think of the room, Mom?" Howell asked. "It's very nice, thank you," I replied. "But it's a little unfamiliar. My old house had a bigger bedroom." "Well, we didn't build this house to accommodate additional tenants," Laurel said, daintily blotting her lips with her napkin. I saw Howell give her a quick glance, but he didn't say anything. "Of course I understand." I nodded. "And I'm very grateful that you've accepted me." "We're glad you're with us, Mom." Howell squeezed my hand. "Aren't we, Laurel?" "Absolutely." She smiled the same smile she'd smiled at my son a few hours ago, the smile of duty. After lunch, I decided to tour the house. It was modern and stylish, but a few oddities caught my eye. Besides the unusually steep staircase and uneven ceilings, one of the walls in the living room seemed uneven, as if it had been added on later, and the back of the house looked as if it had been hastily built. The doorways were different heights, and the floor had a subtle slope in places. As I walked out into the garden, I saw that the fence stood unusually close to the neighboring property, which was clearly municipal property. There was a small playground there. In the evening, As I was getting ready for bed, I heard a muffled conversation from Howell and Laurel's bedroom. Blackwell is no longer an inspector. Do you know what that means? Laurel's voice sounded worried. Calm down. No one would re-inspect without a reason, Howell replied. Everything's fine. What if someone complains? That fence is too obvious, and the second floor? No one's going to complain. All the neighbors know and are quiet. It's the same situation with the Jenkins garage, remember? I didn't pay much attention to the conversation, thinking it was just some minor infraction that many homeowners make. My mind was on something else. How to fit into this new way of life. The first night in my new home was restless. The bed was unaccustomedly soft, and from behind the window came the noise of passing cars. In the suburbs, it was quiet at night, with only crickets chirping in the grass. Here, closer to the center of Winchester, it was still after midnight. I got up at 6 in the morning, as I'd gotten used to over the years. Quietly, I went down to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and took out the bread for toast. In the old kitchen, I could find everything with my eyes closed, but here I had to open every cabinet to find the simplest things. You're up already? Laurel's voice caught me off guard. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing a silk robe and a sleepy face. Howell and I usually eat breakfast at 8. I'm sorry, I'm used to getting up early. I felt guilty, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I'll make breakfast for everyone. Oh, no need. She walked quickly to the kitchen table. Howell and I have a special diet. I usually make protein smoothies and avocado on toast. I noticed her moving the cups I'd gotten to another shelf. We only use these for guests, she explained, pointing to the set I'd chosen. For everyday use, we have these. She pulled a plain white mug from another cabinet. I'll remember. I nodded, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. The next few days passed in a similar rhythm. I tried to find my place in my son's house, but I kept running into invisible boundaries. Laurel politely but insistently corrected my every action, explaining which towels were for what, telling me not to touch the thermostat, showing me the correct way to load the dishwasher. Howell spent most of his time in his home office. When we saw him at dinner, he was friendly but aloof, as if part of his thoughts always remained in his work. He rarely intervened when Laurel made comments to me, only occasionally throwing her a warning glance if she got too harsh. A week after I moved in, Laurel's friend Victoria, a tall woman with bright red hair, came over. They sat on the veranda sipping wine while I read in the living room. The open window allowed me to hear their conversation, though I didn't intend to eavesdrop. How are you getting along with your mother-in-law? Victoria asked with a slight chuckle. It's tolerable, Laurel sighed. She tries to stay out of the way, but, it's still stressful. She's always forgetting where things are, asking a million questions. How long does she plan on staying with you? For the rest of her life, by the looks of it. Laurel's voice sounded grim. Howell insisted she sell her house, said it was too dangerous for her to live alone. And the money from the sale? Most of it went to pay for her husband's medical bills. The rest is in her account, but Howell convinced her to leave it all to us. After all, she has no other relatives. What about that house she was renting out? I'm tense. I never had a second home. What is she talking about? There's no house she rented out, Laurel replied. You're confusing it with someone else's mother-in-law. I'm sorry, that's right, Victoria laughed. It's Sarah's mother-in-law with the rental business. Well, at least you'll have a nice inheritance. If it makes up for having to put up with her habits and her old-fashioned views, Laurel lowered her voice. But I could still hear her. Can you believe she tried to teach me how to cook a roast yesterday? Me, who'd taken 3 cooking classes. They laughed, and I quietly closed the book and went up to my room. My heart was pounding, and there was a lump in my throat. So they're waiting for my inheritance. So I'm just a temporary inconvenience on their way to my money. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, thinking of Albert. He always said Howell was a good boy, just a little aloof. I defended my son when he didn't show up for Christmas or forgot to call on our anniversary. He has his own life, his own family, I kept saying. Now, lying in the darkness of a stranger's house, I wondered, had he ever really been close to us? Had he ever loved us the way we loved him? In the morning, when I went down to the kitchen, I found that my favorite cereal had been moved to the top shelf. hard for me to reach. Sorry, Mom. Howell noticed my confusion. Laurel did the rearranging. She thinks it's more ergonomic. Of course. I grabbed a chair to get the box. It's her kitchen. Our kitchen, he corrected gently. And yours now, too. But we both knew that wasn't true. I was a guest here, a temporary inconvenience. And suddenly I realized with piercing clarity that the house I'd lived in most of my life had been sold. Not because it was dangerous for me to live alone. It was because Howell and Laurel wanted my money and my inheritance. I noticed the odd curve in the wall and remembered their conversation about the inspector the night before. Something was wrong with this house. Something they didn't want the authorities to know about. But I hadn't given it much thought at the time. I woke up to the sound of furniture being moved. I lay still for a few seconds, trying to figure out where I was, until reality hit me with the heavy realization that this wasn't my house, or my bedroom, or Albert rattling around in the kitchen making us Sunday breakfast. I threw on my robe and left the room. The sounds came from the living room. There, I found Laurel looking determinedly at the small table where I'd placed the pictures of our family yesterday. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, Pearl." She didn't even turn around. "I was just tidying up the room. This table was always by the window, not the couch. I noticed that my pictures were already stacked neatly on the coffee table. I thought the window had more light for the pictures," I said. "But of course, it's your house." Laurel finally turned to me, fixing her flawless hair. "Howell's and mine," she smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "And yours too, of course. It's just that we have a routine." "Of course," I nodded. "I'll try not to disrupt your routine." "Good." She turned her attention back to the cushions on the couch. "By the way, Howell's working with a client today, and he asked not to be disturbed until after lunch." I went back to my room to get dressed. When I came downstairs again, I found Laurel gone and my photos still lying in a stack. I put the wedding photo with Albert on the mantelpiece, but I decided to take the rest back to the bedroom. Better not to take any chances. The next 2 weeks became an unspoken competition. I put my things in one place, Laurel moved them to another. I'd make dinner. Laurel would explain that she and Howell had different eating habits. I'd put my books on the living room shelf, the next day finding them neatly stacked in a box, until a better time. Howell pretended not to notice. When I tried to talk to him, he would smile his polite smile and say, "You and Laurel will work it out on your own, Mom." One day, when Laurel was particularly insistent on criticizing my way of folding towels, I looked at my son, expecting support. He only shook his head and retreated to his office, leaving me alone with his wife. On Thursday, I discovered that my favorite ceramic mug that Albert had given me for my 40th birthday was gone. "Laurel, have you seen my blue mug?" I asked, rummaging through the kitchen cabinets. "Oh, the cracked one?" She wouldn't even look up from her clipboard. "I threw it away. It could have broken at any moment." "You threw it away?" I felt a lump in my throat. "It was a gift from Albert." "I'm sorry." There was no remorse in her voice. "But she was in a terrible state. Besides, we had too many dishes already." I walked silently out of the kitchen, feeling my hands shaking. It was just a mug, I told myself. Just a piece of pottery. But to me, it was a piece of my husband. A tangible reminder of our life together. That night, sitting in my room, I pulled out an old photo album. As I flipped through the pages of our family photos, I remembered what Howell had been like as a child. Inquisitive, a little withdrawn, but always kind. When had he changed? Or had I just not noticed that callousness because I only saw the good in him? The next day, when Laurel left for work and Howell locked himself in his office for an online conference, I decided to investigate the house more thoroughly. I was still bothered by the oddities in its construction and the scraps of conversations I'd overheard. I started in the backyard. The fence separating the lot from the municipal playground stood really too close to the swings and slide. I walked along it, noting that it looked newer than the rest of the fence. Back at the house, I turned my attention to the back addition, the part where the kitchen and small dining room were located. The walls were thinner than in the main part of the house, and the ceiling was lower. Then I went up to the second floor. Here the oddities were even more noticeable. Uneven ceilings, strange angles of the rooms, as if someone had built without a clear plan. At the far end of the corridor was a small door that led to what I thought was the attic. It was unlocked. Behind the door was not a stairway to the attic, but another room, a small room with a low ceiling and a tiny window. Judging by the boxes and old furniture, it had been used as a storage room. I cautiously stepped inside, trying not to make any noise. Among the cardboard boxes labeled Christmas and summer stuff, I noticed a metal box. Curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it. Inside were papers. I wasn't going to read my son's personal papers, but one folder caught my eye. It said Home Plans. I opened it and saw blueprints of the house, noticeably different from what had been built. According to these plans, the rear addition was to be half the size, and the second floor was to be a partial one, occupying only half the area of the first floor. Nearby lay a letter from the Winchester Town Council, dated 5 years ago. It stated that the building code had been violated and that the house needed to be brought up to the approved plans. Attached to the letter was a note written in Howell's hand. Talked to Blackwell. 2000 settled the matter. We'll need to do it again in a year. I sat among the boxes, holding proof that my son's house had been built illegally and that the problems had been solved by bribing the inspector. Another folder contained receipts for building materials and contracts with laborers. Judging by the dates, most of the extra work had been done in secret after the house had been officially authorized. Thoughts were rushing feverishly through my head. What should I do with this information? Confront Howell? Pretend I hadn't seen anything? I carefully put the documents back in the drawer and quietly left the room. As I walked down the stairs, I heard Howell's office door open. I quickened my steps, not wanting him to see where I was coming from. Mom? His voice caught me in the middle of the stairs. What were you doing up there? I was just looking around, I said, trying to keep my voice natural. It's such an interesting layout. You shouldn't go upstairs unless you have to, he said with tension in his voice. The stairs are steep, you could fall. Of course, son, I smiled as I walked down to him. I'll be careful. At lunch, Howell was unusually quiet, and Laurel, on the other hand, was overly animated. She talked about her work in the accounting department of a construction company, about difficult clients and how she managed to correct other people's mistakes. By the way, I met Mrs. Parker today, she said as she put her salad on. She was asking about you, Pearl. Mrs. Parker? I couldn't remember anyone by that name. Our neighbor on the left. Laurel exchanged a quick glance with Howell. She saw you walking in the backyard along the fence. Oh yeah, I nodded. Just looking around. It's a beautiful property. You don't want to attract the attention of the neighbors, Mother, Howell interjected. Mrs. Parker's a gossip. I was just walking in the yard, I objected. That's not forbidden, is it? Of course not, Laurel said quickly. It's just, some of the neighbors are a little nosy. They might start asking you about us, about the house. What's wrong with that? I picked up a piece of chicken with my fork. I got nothing to hide. Neither do we. Howell smiled strained. I just don't want you to get dragged into the local squabbles. After dinner, as I was washing dishes, Laurel insisted the dishwasher was broken, even though it had worked fine that morning. I heard a muffled conversation from the living room. She suspected something. Laurel's voice sounded concerned. I saw her studying the fence. Calm down, Howell replied. She's just getting used to it, it's natural. What if she starts asking questions? Or, God forbid, decides to talk to the neighbors? She's my mother, not a spy. Howell sounded annoyed. Let's not panic too soon. Without Blackwell, we're vulnerable. Laurel lowered her voice, and I had to strain to hear. A new inspector could show up at any moment, especially if there's a complaint. No one's going to complain, Howell said confidently. All the neighbors are in the same position. The Thompsons have a patio overlooking a public area. Garcia has a garage twice the size of what's allowed. No one benefits from opening this Pandora's box. Howell came into my room this evening. He looked embarrassed, which was rare. My son always exuded confidence. Mom, he began, sitting down on the edge of my bed. I wanted to apologize for our conversation today. Laurel and I didn't want you to feel restricted. It's okay, son. I patted his arm. I realize you and Laurel are used to a certain routine. I try not to get in the way. You're not in the way, he mumbled. It's just that Laurel. She's a little nervous. She needs time to get used to your presence. 3 weeks isn't long enough? I couldn't contain my sarcasm. Mom, he sighed. Please try for my sake. I really want you and Laurel to get along. I'm trying, Howell, I replied. But I get the impression that Laurel doesn't want me living here. That's not true. He shook his head, but there was something in his eyes that made me doubt his words. Just give her time. The next morning, I found someone going through my things. The jewelry box was open, the photo albums were lying in the wrong order, and the file drawer had clearly been moved. I didn't say anything, but from that day on, I started locking the door of my room when I left it. On Saturday night, Laurel organized a small dinner for her colleagues. I was invited to join, which was unexpected. I wore my best dress and even did some light makeup. The guests, two married couples from Laurel's accounting department, were polite, but their interest in me quickly waned after a few formal questions about my life in Winchester. The conversation revolved around work, mutual acquaintances, and recent movies. I felt invisible. What do you think of this beautiful house? One of the women Carol asked, turning to me. Laurel said you'd recently moved from the suburbs. It's very original, I said, choosing my words. The layout of the second floor is particularly interesting. I saw Laurel tense up and Howell gave me a warning look. Oh, yes, Laurel interjected quickly. We'd chosen an unconventional project. We wanted something special. Very special, I nodded. I've never seen such an unusual roof structure or uneven ceilings. It's a modern architectural technique. Laurel forced a smile. The deliberate asymmetry creates a sense of dynamic space. How interesting, I smiled back. Is the fence behind the house part of this avant-garde design? There was silence in the room. Howell coughed and hurried to change the subject, offering the guests dessert. The rest of the evening passed in a tense atmosphere. Laurel avoided looking in my direction, and Howell was exaggeratedly cheerful, as if trying to compensate for the awkwardness. When the guests left, Laurel turned to me abruptly. What was that about? What was what? I mimed a look of incomprehension. Don't pretend, her eyes narrowed. Those comments about the layout, the fence, were you trying to embarrass us? I was just making small talk, I replied. Did I say something wrong? Laurel, Mom, let's not, Howell interjected. It's been a wonderful evening. Let's not ruin it. No, Howell. Laurel crossed her arms over her chest. I want to know what your mother meant. I didn't mean anything, I said. But since you're asking, I do wonder about some of the features of your house. Like, why is the fence so close to the playground? Or why does the second floor look like it was added later? Or why do you get so nervous when it comes to Inspector Blackwell? Laurel's face turned white, and Howell froze with his glass in his hand. You've been going through our things, Laurel said quietly. You've been spying on us. No, I shook my head. I'm just observant. And I have good hearing. Mom. Howell set his glass on the table and walked over to me. I don't know what you heard or saw, but please, let's talk about this like adults. I nodded. I want to know the truth about your house. Howell and Laurel looked at each other. After a long pause, Howell sighed. Okay. Yes, we have some deviations from the original design. When we started construction, we had one financially, but then things changed. We couldn't afford a house as big as we had originally planned. So instead of downsizing the project, you decided to cheat, I finished for him. We expanded the house after we got all the permits, Howell said. It's common practice, Mom. A lot of people do it. You took a piece of municipal land, I shook my head, and you built a second floor that wasn't in the original plan, and then you bribed the inspector to turn a blind eye. Don't talk like we're criminals, Laurel was outraged. We just wanted a house we could afford. If we'd done things by the book, we'd have had to pay a lot more in taxes and fees. And now you're afraid the new inspector will find violations, I shook my head. That's why you're so nervous about the neighbors and me walking around the yard. Look, Mom, Howell sat down next to me. It's a complicated situation. If the violations are discovered, we could face a huge fine, maybe even a demolition order on part of the house. We can't afford that. What do you want me to do? I asked. Do you want me to pretend I don't know anything? Yes, Laurel answered bluntly. And that you don't draw attention to our house. No talking to the neighbors, no asking questions of strangers. I looked at both of them. My son and his wife had lived a lie, building their home on deceit. And now they were asking me to be complicit. I'm not going to complain to anyone, if that's what you mean, I said finally. But I'm not going to participate in this deception either. Thank you, Mom. Howell exhaled with relief. We appreciate your understanding. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. The son I'd raised, the man I'd always been proud of, was capable of cheating for material gain. He had been bribing and breaking the law for years and apparently had no remorse. What else didn't I know about him? What else was he hiding from me? And most importantly, could I trust him in other matters? Like when he assured me that he was happy for me to move in with them, or when he told me that it was dangerous for me to live alone. The next day, the atmosphere in the house became even more tense. Laurel barely spoke to me, and Howell was unusually attentive, as if trying to compensate for his wife's coldness. He even offered to go to a movie together, something he hadn't done since I'd moved in. Thanks, son, but I'm not in the mood, I declined. Mom, he sat down next to me on the couch. I know that yesterday's conversation was unpleasant, but you have to understand Laurel and I didn't do anything wrong. We just, skirted the system a little bit. Bypassed the law. I corrected, and you keep lying about it. We're not the only ones, he sounded hurt. Half the houses in this neighborhood were built with violations. It's common practice. Just because a lot of people do it doesn't make it right, I shook my head. I taught you differently, Howell. Yes, you did, he stood up. And I'm grateful for your lessons. But the real world is more complicated than it seems when you're young. Sometimes you have to make compromises. Compromises with your conscience? I looked him in the eye. This is not the man my father and I raised. Howell didn't say anything, just pressed his lips together and left the room. I remained sitting in the living room, feeling the frustration building inside, not just in my son, but in myself. What had I missed in raising him? At what point had he decided that deception was an acceptable path to success? That evening, after a dinner that passed in oppressive silence, I heard Howell and Laurel arguing again in their bedroom. She's judging us. Laurel's voice sounded strained. Your mother thinks she's better than us. She's just old school, Howell replied. Everything is black or white to her. And what if she does decide to report it, out of principle or revenge? Mom wouldn't do that, Howell said confidently. I'm her son. She would never hurt me. Are you sure? After she went through our things and made a scene in front of the guests? She didn't make a scene, Howell said, irritation in his voice. And she didn't go through it on purpose. She stumbled across some documents. In a secret room, in a locked drawer, Laurel said sarcastically. A very convenient coincidence. I stepped quietly away from the door. I didn't want to hear any more of their conversation, but I knew one thing for sure now. Laurel didn't trust me and saw me as a threat, and Howell. Howell was torn between loyalty to his wife and a sense of duty to his mother. Back in my room, I sat at the window looking out at the dark street. Illegal house, illegal fence, bribing the inspector. What had my son's life become, and why did I only find out about it now? The atmosphere in the house was getting more tense by the day. After Laurel found out that I knew about the irregularities in the construction of their house, she almost stopped talking to me, limiting herself to short phrases as needed. Howell tried to smooth things over, but I could see that he too had grown wary of me, as if I were a time bomb that could explode at any moment. One morning at breakfast, Laurel announced, "This Friday, my parents and my sister and her husband are coming to visit. They're staying for the weekend." That's nice, I said, buttering my toast. I haven't seen them in a while. In fact, I'd only met Laurel's parents twice at the wedding and at Albert's funeral. They were polite but aloof, just like their daughter. Yes, it's going to be fun. Howell forced out a smile that didn't touch his eyes. We need to cook something special. I tried to be helpful. Maybe I'll bake my apple pie. Your father loved it. Not necessary, Laurel said quickly. My mom's allergic to cinnamon. I'll make it myself. I can help clean up, I offered. I'll call a cleaning service, Laurel said. They'll be here on Thursday. I nodded, feeling like I was being methodically excluded from any preparations, like an unwanted guest. It was true, though. I was never welcome in this house. On Friday, the house was filled with activity. The cleaning service had scrubbed everything to a shine. Laurel had decorated the living room with fresh flowers, and Howell had arranged the wine bottles in a special sequence. I tried to stay out of the way, spending most of my time in my room. Toward evening, I heard the noise of a car pulling up and went downstairs. There were already suitcases in the hallway, and Laurel was hugging a short woman, her mother, Mrs. Prescott. Nearby, her father, a tall man with a military bearing, was shaking hands with Howell. A little farther away stood Laurel's sister. I remembered her name was Diana, and her husband, whose name I couldn't remember. There was Pearl! Howell exclaimed with exaggerated enthusiasm. Do you remember my mother? Of course I do, nodded Mr. Prescott. How are you, Pearl? Not bad, thank you, I smiled. It's good to see you all. Mrs. Prescott came over and hugged me lightly. My condolences about your husband, she said. We couldn't make it to the funeral. We were out of the country. Thank you, I replied. It was hard. Well, Laurel stepped in. Let's show you to your rooms. Mom, Dad, you'll be in the guest bedroom. Diane and Jeff, we've got Howell's office ready for you. There's a sofa bed. I helped carry some of the bags upstairs, feeling Mrs. Prescott's appraising gaze on me. Once the guests were settled and downstairs, Laurel invited everyone to the table. The dinner was spectacular. Laurel had outdone herself with a roast duck, several elaborate side dishes, and a dessert that looked like it had been created by a professional pastry chef. I felt a prick of envy. My simple home cooking had never been so exquisite. The conversation around the table revolved around news of the Prescott family, their recent trip to Europe, and Diane's success with her law firm. I was mostly silent, occasionally inserting a polite comment. No one was particularly interested in my opinions or my life. Pearl, how are you doing in Winchester? Diana finally asked, as if she'd remembered I existed. It's a big change from the suburbs, isn't it? Yes, definitely, I nodded. It's much busier here. But Howell and Laurel's house is very interesting. Interesting. I noticed Laurel tense up and Howell took a big sip of wine. Oh yes, Mr. Prescott said. It's an unusual layout. How much did you pay for it, Howell? Not as much as we could have. He grinned nervously. We got lucky with the contractor. And the inspector, I guess. I muttered quietly enough for only Howell, who was sitting next to me, to hear. He gave me a warning glance but didn't say anything. After dinner, everyone went into the living room for coffee and dessert. The conversation flowed casually, but I felt like an outsider in this family circle. Laurel and her sister were exchanging jokes that only they could understand. The parents were proudly talking about their daughter's accomplishments, and Howell was careful to maintain his image of the perfect son-in-law. I was an extra in the picture. By the way, Howell said as the clock struck almost 11 p.m., we have a little problem with the accommodations. Everyone turned to look at him, including me. The thing is, he looked at me with an apologetic smile. Jeff suffers from a severe dust allergy, and my office, as it turns out, has an old couch that— Oh my God, yes, Diane interjected. Jeff was already itching. We're not going to be able to sleep there. I thought maybe Mom wouldn't mind sleeping in the garage. Howell said it like he was asking me to take a walk in the park. I've already set up a place to sleep. It's only for a couple nights. I froze, not believing my ears. A garage? He's offering me, his 78-year-old mother, to sleep in the garage to free up my room for his wife's sister? The garage? I asked, thinking I'd misheard. Yeah, I put a cot in there and a heater. Howell smiled. It's quite comfortable. Laurel laughed out loud, as if he'd said something incredibly witty. Oh, Howell, your mom won't sleep in the garage. She turned to me. Pearl, he's just kidding. I exhaled with relief, but then Laurel continued. Sure, we'll make your bed in the laundry room. It's warmer there. She laughed again, and Diana and Jeff joined her. Howell let out a chuckle, but I could see the embarrassment in his eyes. Yeah, I started, but Howell interrupted me. Mom, I actually have a place for you in the garage. Believe me, it's a good place to spend the night. I checked it out myself. You're suggesting I sleep in the garage? I still couldn't believe what was happening. It's only for 2 nights. Laurel interjected. Diane and Jeff are leaving Sunday afternoon. Why don't they stay at a hotel? I asked bluntly. There are several good hotels in Winchester. Don't be silly, Mrs. Prescott snorted. Why pay for a hotel when you can stay with the family? Exactly, Laurel said. Family has to stick together. I looked at Howell, expecting him to rise to my defense, to say that his elderly mother couldn't sleep in the garage. But he remained silent, avoiding my gaze. Okay, I finally said, feeling a hot wave of humiliation rising inside. I'll sleep in the garage. That's great, Laurel glowed. Howell, show Mom her apartment. She laughed again, and her laughter echoed in my ears as I followed my son to the garage door. The garage was cold and smelled of machine oil. There was an old cot with a thin mattress in the corner and a small electric heater next to it. Howell had brought my nightgown and toothbrush. Mom, I'm sorry, he said quietly, but it's really only for 2 nights. Why didn't you offer the garage to Diane and Jeff? I asked. Or get them a hotel room? You know Laurel, he sighed. She's very attached to her family, and Jeff does suffer from allergies. And I suffer from arthritis, I countered. And I'm 78 years old, Howell. I know, Mom, he lowered his head. But, Laurel insisted, and I thought you'd understand. For me, I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, the man I loved more than anything in the world, and felt something inside me finally shatter. He chose Laurel. He would always choose Laurel. Good night, Howell, I said, turning away. Good night, Mom. He paused, as if he wanted to add something, but then he just walked out, closing the door behind him. I sat down on the cot, which creaked threateningly under my weight. The heater was barely keeping up with the cold of the garage. I wrapped myself in the thin blanket Howell had brought and tried not to think about how low I'd fallen in my son's eyes. It had been a terrible night. The cot was uncomfortable, the garage was cold despite the heater, and my mind was spinning, keeping me awake. I remembered holding Howell in my arms when he was a baby, teaching him to read. How proud I was of his first successes in school. Where had I gone wrong? At what point did I lose my son? I woke up this morning a wreck. Every bone ached, my neck was stiff, and my mood was worse than ever. I quietly entered the house, hoping to slip into the bathroom, but the whole family was already in the kitchen. Oh, Mom, Howell smiled at me. How did you sleep? Great, I lied. The garage is so atmospheric. Laurel snorted, covering her mouth with her hand. See, I told you Pearl would understand, she said, turning to her parents. She's so understanding. Mr. Prescott nodded politely, but I could see some embarrassment in his eyes. Maybe not everyone in this family liked the way the old woman was treated. The afternoon was spent touring the city and eating at restaurants. I declined to join in, citing fatigue. No one particularly insisted. In the evening, when everyone returned, I was again forced to head to the garage. This time, Howell didn't even walk me out, just said, I added another blanket, Mom. Good night. The second night was no better than the first. The cold and the uncomfortable bed had added to the heartache. I lay in the dark, listening to the muffled laughter from the house and felt completely alone. Albert would never have let me be treated like this, but Albert was gone, and my son had chosen another family. That night, I made a decision. I would not take any more humiliation. I'm too old to start over, but I'm too proud to let them wipe their feet on me. If Howell and Laurel care so much about their illegally built house, let them feel what it means to be evicted. In the morning, after waiting for everyone to leave for breakfast at the cafe, I wasn't invited, of course, I hailed a cab and drove to the Winchester City Hall. The town hall building was old but well preserved, with columns at the entrance and flags over the door. I walked up to the information desk, where a young woman with the name tag, Samantha, smiled at me welcomingly. What can I do for you? She asked. I'd like to file a complaint about illegal construction, I said firmly. Sure, she handed me a form. Fill out this form. You'll need to provide an address and describe the violations you've noticed. I took the form and sat down at one of the tables. My hands trembled slightly as I typed out the address of Howell and Laurel's house. I detailed everything I knew. The illegal addition, the taking of municipal land, the unauthorized construction of the second floor. I mentioned the bribes to former Inspector Blackwell. When I returned the completed form, Samantha looked it over carefully. These are serious allegations, Mrs. Thatcher, she said, especially concerning Inspector Blackwell. He was indeed fired recently, and rumor has it that bribes were the reason. I understand the seriousness of what I'm saying. I nodded. And I'm willing to cooperate with the investigating authorities. Good. She put the form aside in a special folder. Your complaint will be reviewed as soon as possible. The process usually takes 1 to 2 weeks. We will contact you at the phone number provided. Thank you. I stood up, feeling both relieved and heavy at the same time. I had just betrayed my own son. But hadn't he betrayed me first? When I returned to the house, I found the Prescott family already packing. Laurel announced that they had decided to leave today instead of tomorrow to avoid Sunday traffic. So you can go back to your room today, she said with fake concern. Wouldn't that be nice? I just nodded, not trusting my voice. A storm of emotions raged inside me: bitter, resentment, determination, and a strange, almost gloating anticipation. The house was quiet after the guests left. Laurel cleaned up, Howell went to his office, and I returned to my room, which felt like paradise after 2 nights in the garage. I took a shower, washing away not only the physical grime, but as if the mental heaviness of the last few days. 10 days had passed. Howell and Laurel seemed to have forgotten about the garage incident, though I hadn't forgotten or forgiven. I acted the same as usual, but things had changed inside of me. I was no longer trying to please Laurel, no longer striving to earn my son's approval. I just waited. On the 11th day, the bell rang. Howell and Laurel were at work, so I answered the phone. Mrs. Thatcher? It was a man's voice. This is Robert Kingsley from the Municipal Building Inspection Department. We've reviewed your complaint and conducted an inspection of the address. And what did you find? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Your allegations are true, he said in a serious tone. There are indeed violations. In fact, they are quite substantial. The illegal addition is encroaching on city land, and the second floor is dangerous because of the construction violations. What happens now? My voice sounded calmer than I felt. We have prepared an order to immediately cease operation of the illegal additions and prepare for their demolition. The residents will have to temporarily leave the house during the work. An administrative fine will also be imposed. I understood. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. When will the order be ready? It's already ready, Kingsley answered. 1 copy has been mailed, but since you are the applicant and live at the address, I can give you a copy in person. It would be quicker. Yes, that would be good, I agreed. 2 hours later, Mr. Kingsley, a tall man in a smart suit, handed me an official envelope stamped with the Winchester Municipality seal. Inside was an order detailing all the violations and requiring me to vacate the house within 7 days to begin demolition work on the illegal additions. I thanked the inspector and placed the envelope on the dining room table when he left. Then I sat in a chair in the living room and waited for Howell and Laurel to return. They came in together, talking animatedly about some movie they were planning to watch tonight. When they saw me, they stopped talking. Mom, is something wrong? Howell asked, noticing my unusually solemn expression. There's a letter on the table for you, I said in a steady voice. It's from the municipality. Laurel froze, her face pale. Howell walked slowly to the table and picked up the envelope. I could see his hands trembling as he opened it. What's in it? Laurel walked over to him, peering over his shoulder. Howell ran his eyes over the document, and his face changed. Shock, disbelief, horror, all these emotions alternated. This is an eviction order, he said in a hoarse voice. They found violations. They say we have to vacate the house to demolish the illegal additions. What? Laurel snatched the paper out of his hands. How is that possible? How did they find out? Who? She stopped talking, slowly looking up at me. Her eyes flashed with understanding, then rage. You, she hissed. You're the one who told them. I stood up calmly from my chair. Yes, I said simply. I did. Mom? Howell looked at me in disbelief. You, betrayed us? Betrayed us? I shook my head. No, Howell, you're the one who betrayed me when you sent your 78-year-old mother to sleep in the garage to please your wife. That was only for 2 nights. he exclaimed. "And now you've destroyed our home." "I didn't destroy your house," I objected. "You destroyed it when you decided to build it on lies and deceit. All I did was restore justice." Laurel burst into tears, sliding into a chair. "You have no idea what you've done," she sobbed. "We won't be able to pay the fine, let alone rebuild the house." "I'm sorry," I said, and it was partly true. I was really sorry it had come to this. "But maybe now you'll understand what it's like to be evicted from your own home." Howell looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. "I never thought you were capable of such cruelty," he said quietly. "What would my father say if he saw what you'd become?" It was a low blow, but I kept my composure. "Your father would never have allowed me to be treated the way you've been treating me these past weeks," I said. "And he would never have approved of your deception." I turned and walked toward the stairs, feeling their gazes on me. Howell's shocked one and Laurel's hateful one. I woke up to loud voices. The clock read 3 in the morning, but Laurel's furious exclamations and Howell's muffled responses were coming from downstairs. I was wide awake. I sat up on the bed, listening. "She should withdraw the complaint," Laurel shouted. "It's the only way out." "You think I didn't try to convince her?" Howell's voice sounded tired. "She's adamant." "Then make her. It's your mother, damn it. What do you suggest? Threaten her? She's an old woman, Laurel. An old woman who ruined our lives." Laurel's voice was hysterical. "We're gonna lose the house, Howell. Do you understand?" "The house." I sighed softly. We hadn't spoken much since the injunction yesterday. Howell had tried twice to convince me to withdraw the complaint, but I refused. Now, apparently, they were devising a new plan. At breakfast in the morning, the atmosphere was so tense that it seemed like you could cut the air with a knife. Laurel sat with eyes swollen with tears. Howell looked like he'd been up all night. I sipped my tea quietly, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. "Mom," Howell began, pushing his untouched plate away. "We have to talk." "I'm listening," I said, sipping my tea. "What you did, it's terrible." He looked me straight in the eye. "Do you realize that we could lose everything?" "Just like I lost my house when you convinced me to sell it and move in with you," I replied calmly. "Those are completely different things," Laurel intervened. "We invited you to live with us. We took care of you." "Cared?" I raised an eyebrow. "You made me sleep in the garage, Laurel, at my age with my arthritis, and you laughed about it. It was temporary." She splashed her hands. "Just for 2 nights. And now, because of your vindictiveness, we could be homeless." "You won't be homeless," I argued. "Only the illegal additions will be demolished. What you had the right to build will remain." "That's half the house!" Laurel screamed. "We can't live in what's left." "Then you'll have to move," I shrugged. "Maybe into the garage?" Laurel gasped in indignation, and Howell shook his head. "Mom, I never thought you were capable of such cruelty," he said quietly. "You punish us disproportionately to our guilt. You evicted me to the garage. I'm evicting you from an illegal house," I replied. "Seems fair to me." "Fair?" Laurel jumped up. "You ruined our lives over some grudge. You're so selfish." "Laurel," Howell said warningly, but she didn't stop. "Do you know why we didn't want you to live with us?" She leaned across the table toward me. "Because you've always been a cold, demanding mother. Howell told me how you controlled his every move, how you were never satisfied with his accomplishments. But we accepted you anyway because that's what family does." I looked at Howell, expecting him to refute his wife's words, but he remained silent, his eyes downcast. That silence hurt more than Laurel's accusations. "I see," I said slowly, rising from the table. "Well, if I'm such a terrible mother, it must be easier for you to live without me. I'll move out tonight." "Where will you go?" Howell finally looked up. "You have no other place to live." "I'll manage," I replied. After all, I'd lived 78 years solving my own problems. I went up to my room and started packing. My hands were shaking slightly, but I didn't let myself give in to my emotions. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the number of Margaret Wilson, an old friend of mine with whom we'd spoken occasionally since I'd moved into the Howell house. "Margaret? It's Pearl. I'm sorry to bother you, but, I need your help." An hour later, I was loading my boxes into a cab. Howell came out on the porch, watching me pack with an unreadable expression. "You're really leaving," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes." I closed the trunk. "It's best for everyone." "What about the complaint?" He took a step toward me. "Will you withdraw it?" I looked at my son, the only child I'd loved all my life. Even now, after everything that had happened, his well-being worried me. But then I remembered the cold garage, Laurel's laughter, his acquiescence to his own mother's humiliation. "No, Howell," I said firmly. "The complaint will stand. You broke the law, and you must be held accountable. As you always told your friends as a child, every action has consequences." "You don't understand," he shook his head. "The fine could bankrupt us. And if the house has to be sold, I'm sorry. I did feel regret, but not remorse. But I wouldn't change my mind." I got into the cab, and the driver started the car. In the rearview mirror, I saw Howell standing on the porch giving me a look. Part of me wanted him to run after the car to apologize, to tell me he loved me no matter what. But he just stood there, growing smaller and smaller as the cab moved away from the house. Margaret Wilson lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Winchester. We'd met years ago at a book club and maintained a friendly relationship, even though we didn't see each other very often. She welcomed me with open arms. "Pearl, darling, come in." She helped me with my bags. "The guest room is all yours. Stay as long as you like." "Thank you, Margaret." I hugged my friend. "It's only for a few days until I find something suitable." "Take your time," she smiled. "I enjoy your company. Since George died, the house has been too quiet." Margaret, like me, was a widow. Her husband had passed away 3 years ago, and she lived alone, gardening and contributing to the local library. Her apartment was cozy, with lots of books and potted plants. "Tea?" she offered as I settled into the guest room. "And you can tell me what happened between you and Howell." Over tea, I told her everything about the unfriendly reception at my son's house, Laurel's constant nagging, the garage, and finally my complaint to the town council. "Oh my God," Margaret shook her head. "Making you sleep in the garage. It's outrageous." "I know my reaction may seem excessive," I sighed, "but I just couldn't take the humiliation." "You did the right thing," Margaret said firmly. "If Howell broke the law, he should be held accountable, and the way they treated you, unforgivable." Her encouragement gave me strength. That night I felt peace for the first time in a long time. Margaret didn't judge me, didn't demand an explanation, just accepted and supported me. The next day, I started looking for a place to live. My pension was modest, but the money from the sale of the house, though reduced by Albert's medical expenses, still gave me some financial cushion. I looked at the rental ads, but the prices in Winchester were higher than I expected. "Why don't you think about a nursing home?" Margaret suggested it over breakfast. "Don't look at me like that. I mean modern residences for the elderly. There are separate apartments, common areas for socializing, medical staff in case you need them." "I don't know, Margaret," I grumbled. "I've always envisioned these places as the last stop." "Oh, it's not like that at all." She shook her head vigorously. "My sister lives in a residence like this in Brighton. She has her own apartment, complete independence, but there are always people around, and no worries about repairs or snow removal." The idea was starting to seem not so bad to me. After all, it was really hard for me to do the housework alone, and the prospect of having people my own age around to socialize with was appealing. "I'll think about it," I agreed. "Do you know any good places in Winchester?" "There's Sunny Hills on the northern edge," Margaret reflected. "And Garden Terraces is closer to the center. Both places have a good reputation. We can go and have a look if you like." The next day, Margaret and I visited Garden Terraces, a complex of several low-rise buildings surrounded by a well-kept garden. The administrator, a friendly middle-aged woman, gave us a tour, showing us the common areas and one of the vacant apartments, small but bright, with a separate kitchen and balcony. "We have a nurse on duty 24 hours a day," she told us. "There are weekly activities, from literary evenings to yoga classes for the elderly. And of course, you can invite guests anytime." I loved the place, but the cost was more than I could afford on a regular basis. My savings would melt away too quickly. "I need to think about it," I told the receptionist, "and perhaps find an additional source of income." "Of course. she smiled. The apartment would be vacant for at least another month. Let me know if you decide to move in. On the way home, Margaret suggested, why don't you look for a part-time job? You used to be a chemistry teacher, right? Maybe there are schools that need counselors or substitutes. The thought hadn't occurred to me. Since retiring 15 years ago, I hadn't considered going back to teaching, but the idea was interesting. Do you think anyone would want to hire a 78-year-old woman? I hesitated. Why not? You have a lot of experience, Margaret shrugged. It couldn't be worse if you tried. The next day, I called several schools in Winchester. Two of them politely declined, saying there were no openings, but the third, Winchester High School, was interested. We're just looking for a counselor for our chemistry lab, said the vice principal, Mrs. Bennett. Our lab assistant is on maternity leave, and it's hard to find a qualified replacement. If you do have experience teaching chemistry, we could meet for an interview. The interview was scheduled for the next day. I was as nervous as a schoolgirl before an exam, going through my old notes and remembering teaching techniques. Margaret helped me pick out an appropriate outfit, not too formal, but not too casual either. Winchester High School turned out to be a modern building with spacious, bright classrooms. Mrs. Bennett, an energetic woman in her 50s, greeted me warmly. Mrs. Thatcher, it's a pleasure to meet you. She shook my hand. Your resume is impressive. 35 years of teaching chemistry is a lot of experience. The interview went better than I expected. We discussed modern teaching techniques, lab safety, and my experience working with teenagers. I talked about my approach to teaching, about how important it is to get kids interested in the subject, not just make them memorize formulas. You know, Mrs. Thatcher, Mrs. Bennett said at the end of the conversation, I think you're just the person we need. It's a part-time position, 3 days a week, 4 hours. You'll help the chemistry teachers prepare lab work, keep safety in mind, and occasionally give extra tutoring to students who are falling behind. How does that sound? Sounds great, I smiled, feeling a sudden rush of enthusiasm. When can I start? If you're happy with the pay, you can start next week. She handed me the contract. Read it, think about it, and let me know. I returned to Margaret with the happy news. The salary on offer, though not huge, combined with my pension, allowed me to consider Garden Terraces more seriously. See? Margaret put her arm around me. I told you your experience would be valuable. That evening, I got a call from Howell. When I saw his number on the phone screen, I hesitated before answering. Mom? His voice sounded tense. How are you? I'm fine, I answered guardedly. How are you? Not so good, he sighed. Laurel and I were at the municipality. We tried to appeal the decision, but, unsuccessful. The inspector said the violations were too serious to be retroactively legalized. I'm sorry, I said, and it was partly true. I didn't want my son to suffer, but I thought he should be held accountable for his actions. We got a ticket, Howell continued, a pretty hefty one, and they're requiring us to vacate the house while they demolish the illegal additions. Laurel and I, we don't know what to do. You could sell the house, I suggested. Even with some of the demolition, it would still have value. We're trying, he sounded bitter, but the price will be much lower than we expected. And we still have a mortgage. There was a pause. I waited to see what he would say next, sensing that this call had a purpose. Mom, Howell finally said, I know what Laurel and I did to you was wrong, especially that episode with the garage. It was unacceptable. I should have protected you, but I didn't, and I apologize. His apology took me by surprise. I didn't expect Howell to admit his guilt. Thank you for apologizing, I said after a pause. I was really hurt when you let Laurel treat me like that. I know, his voice trembled. And I'm truly sorry. But Mom, is there any chance you could withdraw the complaint? Or at least ask for a reduced sentence? If you say that we've already agreed to demolish the illegal structures voluntarily, that's it. The apology was just an approach to the real purpose of the call. Howell, I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. I will not lie to the authorities. You broke the law and you must be held accountable. But Mom, this could ruin our lives. There was desperation in his voice. Laurel and I could lose everything. Like so many other people who get into difficult situations because of their own bad decisions. I said firmly. You're a grown man, Howell. You knowingly broke the law, and now you have to accept the consequences. Then you're not helping, he said, coldness in his voice. Even though I apologized. Apologizing doesn't negate the consequences, I replied. You should have thought of the potential problems when you decided to skirt the law. I see, he said quietly. Well, that's it then. Goodbye, Mom. He hung up without waiting for my answer. I sat staring at the phone in my hand for a long time, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. I might have lost my son forever, but I couldn't compromise my principles, even for his sake. The next week, I started schoolwork. To be back in the lab, to smell the reagents, to see the curious eyes of the students. All this filled me with new energy. I helped prepare experiments, monitored safety, and taught extra classes to students who were falling behind. The teachers received me warmly, appreciating my experience, and the students quickly got used to Mrs. T, as they called me. At the same time, I signed a contract with Garden Terraces. I could move in 2 weeks when the cosmetic repairs to the apartment were finished. Life seemed to be getting better. I hadn't heard from Howell. I wanted to call him several times, but I stopped myself. He'd made it clear he didn't want to keep in touch after I refused to help with the complaint. One day on my way home from school, I happened to drive past their house. There was a for sale sign at the gate, and the driveway was empty. No Howell's car or Laurel's van. Had they moved out already, or were they just at work? I didn't bother stopping to find out. A few days later, Margaret came home with news. I heard about your son and his wife, she said, hanging up her coat. My friend Eleanor lives next door to them. She says they sold the house to some developer who plans to tear it down completely and build a new one. Had they moved in yet? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Yes, last week. Eleanor says they were very depressed, especially your sister-in-law. It seems they had to sell the house much cheaper than they'd bargained for. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but at the cost of my relationship with my son. Do you regret what you did? Margaret asked, looking at me carefully. I wondered, do I regret it? Because of my complaint, Howell and Laurel had lost their home, were facing financial difficulties, and perhaps their marriage was now in crisis. But they'd created this situation themselves with their bad decisions and their attitude toward me. No, I finally answered. I have no regrets. They did wrong, both with the house and with me. I was just doing them justice. Margaret nodded, neither condemning nor approving, just accepting my answer. On the day I moved into Garden Terraces, I packed up my few belongings and said goodbye to Margaret, promising to visit her often. My new apartment was small but cozy. The balcony overlooked the communal garden, where the older residents of the complex sat on benches, played chess, or simply enjoyed the sunshine. As I arranged books on the shelves and hung photos, I reflected on the strange turn my life had taken. 3 months ago, I had sold my house and moved in with my son, certain that I would spend the rest of my days with his family. Now I was starting a new life with a job, a new place to live, new acquaintances. At 78, I was once again on the threshold of the unknown. In the evening, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, watching the sun go down. Below, an elderly couple strolled slowly down the path, holding hands. A gray-haired man was playing chess on a bench with a young boy, probably his grandson. A woman about my age was watering flowers on a neighboring balcony and waved at me in greeting. I waved back, feeling strangely calm. Yes, I had lost my son. Yes, I was in a completely new situation for me. But for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free and, surprisingly, full of hope for the future. It had been 3 months since I'd moved into Garden Terraces. Autumn was slowly giving way to winter. The trees outside my window had lost their last leaves, and the grass was covered with hoarfrost in the mornings. I had already gotten used to the new routine. 3 days a week I worked at school, Tuesdays were book club, and Thursdays were watercolor lessons taught by one of the residents of the complex, a former art teacher. My apartment has become really cozy. I bought a few new things, a comfortable rocking chair, a colorful rug, live plants. Albert's photos were on the dresser and desk, reminding me of the happy days of our life together. I didn't put Howell's pictures away, but I didn't display them prominently. They were kept in an album in a desk drawer. I hadn't heard from my son and his wife since they sold the house. Margaret occasionally brought scraps of news from her friend Eleanor. Howell and Laurel had rented a small apartment in another Winchester neighborhood. Laurel had lost her job in accounting because of layoffs. Howell was working harder to make up for the loss of his second income. But this information was sparse and probably not entirely reliable, because Eleanor wasn't their neighbor now and learned the news through third hands. I tried not to think about them too often, but sometimes, especially in the evenings, when I sat alone with a book or a cup of tea, my thoughts returned to my son. I wondered if he would ever forgive me, if I would ever see him again. At such moments, doubts crept up on me. Had I done the right thing? Had I been too cruel? But then I remembered the cold garage, Laurel's laughter, Howell's acquiescence to his own mother's humiliation, and determination returned. One November day, on my way home from school, I saw a familiar figure at the entrance to Garden Terraces. My heart skipped a beat. It was Howell. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looking drained and tired. Howell! I walked up to him, not knowing what to expect. What are you doing here? He looked up and I saw a mixture of emotions in his eyes: anger, fatigue, something akin to regret. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded strained. Yeah, I wanted to see how you were settling in. Come on in. I opened the door to the entryway. My apartment's on the second floor. We walked upstairs in silence. I could feel the tension building between us with each step. Howell looked around, noting the cozy common areas, the neat hallways, the potted flowers on the windowsills. It's nice here, he finally said as we entered my apartment. It looks comfortable. Yes, I like it here. I went into the kitchen. Tea? He sat down at the small dining table, still looking around. Are you working? He asked, noticing the stack of notebooks on the table. At school as a counselor in the chemistry lab, I answered, putting the kettle on. 3 days a week. I like being around kids again. And they let you work at your age? He sounded surprised. Imagine, I grinned. 78 years old is no reason to write a person off. I'm still useful. Howell nodded, accepting the cup of tea I held out to him. He took a sip, then set the cup down and looked me straight in the eye. Why did you do it, Mom? He asked quietly. Do you know what we've been through because of your complaint? I sat down across from him, gathering my thoughts. I did it because you and Laurel showed me what I meant to you, I answered calmly. You sent me to sleep in the garage, Howell. Your wife laughed at me, and you kept quiet. It was only for 2 nights. He shook his head. And you ruined our life. It wasn't me and my complaining that ruined your life, I countered. It was your own decisions. You knowingly broke the law, knowingly bribed the inspector. You lived in a house built on lies and deceit. Sooner or later it would have come out anyway. You don't understand, Howell sighed. Everybody does it. Half the houses in that neighborhood aren't built properly. It's just that neighbors don't report each other. They don't, I nodded. Because neighbors respect each other. Did you and Laurel respect me? When you evicted her to the garage to make room for her sister? When Laurel moved my things, mocked my habits, threw away the mug Albert had given me? Howell was silent, staring into his cup. I could see his cheekbones set, the way he always did when he disagreed but couldn't find an argument. Laurel and I broke up, he finally said, looking up. 2 weeks ago. The statement caught me off guard. I'd expected anything but that. I'm sorry, I said automatically, not knowing what else to say. Really? He grinned bitterly. You never liked Laurel. You should be glad. You're my son, Howell, I shook my head. I'll never be happy about your failures, even if I don't approve of your choices. He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to see if I was sincere. It started after we sold the house, he said finally. Laurel. She couldn't handle the situation. Blamed me for not being able to convince you to withdraw your complaint. Said I was weak, that a real man would have been able to protect his family. He paused, and then she lost her job, and it got worse. Constant arguments, recriminations. Finally, she packed up and moved back in with her parents. I'm really sorry, I repeated. And this time I really felt sorry. Not for my actions, but for the pain my son was feeling. You know what the ironic thing is? Howell looked up at me with tired eyes. When all this started, I realized for the first time how you felt. What it's like when someone close to you doesn't stand up for you, silently lets others humiliate you. He stopped talking. I didn't protect you from Laurel, and she didn't protect me from her parents when they called me a failure and a disgrace to the family. His confession touched me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my son truly understood my feelings. I'm not here to apologize, Howell continued after a pause. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted to see you. Make sure you're okay. I'm fine, I nodded. More than okay. I have a job I like, new friends, a cozy place to live. At my age, a lot of people would dream of a life like this. You've always been strong. The corners of his lips lifted a little in a semblance of a smile. Stronger than me. Not stronger, I countered. Just with a clearer sense of right and wrong. Your father always said that's where you and I differ. For me, the world is black and white. For you, it's full of shades of gray. Dad was right, Howell nodded. He was right about a lot of things. We sat there for a while talking about neutral topics about my schoolwork, about his new projects. He'd found a part-time job to help with his finances. When he got ready to leave, I walked him to the door. Are you planning to move out of Winchester? I asked, remembering that he'd always talked about wanting to live in a big city. No, he shook his head. Not yet anyway. I have clients here, a job. You're here. I didn't know what to say to that. We stood in the doorway, staring at each other, separated by months of hurt and misunderstanding, but still bound by the unbreakable ties of blood. I could, come again sometime? Howell asked uncertainly. Maybe next month? Sure, I nodded. I'd be glad to. He made a movement like he wanted to hug me, but he stopped. I didn't make a move toward him either. We weren't ready for this yet. Maybe someday, but not now. Goodbye, Mom, he said, turning toward the stairs. Goodbye, Howell, I said, watching him go down. After he left, I sat at the window for a long time, thinking about our conversation. Some part of me wanted things to be different, to be close to my son and me again. But another part of me realized that too much had happened between us, and some wounds don't heal quickly, if at all. The next day was Tuesday, book club day. I made apple pie for the tea party after the discussion and headed to the garden terrace common living room. My new friends were already gathered there. Eleanor, a former librarian with a sharp wit and wry sense of humor. Herbert, a retired literature professor who always found in books what eluded the rest of us. Doris, a former nurse whose comments were always practical and specific, and several other people I'd met over the months. Here was Pearl with her famous apple pie, Eleanor exclaimed as I entered. Just in time. We were just about to begin. We were discussing George Eliot's Middlemarch, and the discussion was lively. Herbert insisted that Dorothea Brooke was the epitome of female naivety, Eleanor argued vehemently, and I offered my interpretation based on the historical context of the era. The 2 hours flew by, and as we moved on to tea, I felt that special pleasure that comes from intellectual conversations with equals. Pearl, you seem thoughtful today, Doris said, sitting down with a cup of tea. Is something the matter? My son came by yesterday, I answered. We haven't seen each other for months, not since, well, you know the story. Friends at the book club knew about my conflict with Howell and Laurel. I told them shortly after I moved in when they asked about my family. And how did the meeting go? Eleanor asked, moving a plate of cookies toward me. It's weird, I pondered, searching for words. He said that he and Laurel had broken up, and that he started to realize how I felt. Better late than never, Eleanor hummed. Though it's a shame he had to go through so much trouble to realize it. Sometimes only our own experience can teach us empathy, Herbert said thoughtfully. Do you plan to rebuild the relationship? I don't know, I answered honestly. He is my son, and I will always love him, but there's so much distrust, resentment. I'm not sure we can go back to the way things were. Maybe we don't have to go back to the old relationship, Doris said. Maybe we should build a new one. You've changed over the months, Pearl. More confident, more independent. And he seems to have changed too. Maybe you both need to reacquaint yourselves with each other. What she said made me wonder, had I really changed? Looking back, I could see how much my life had transformed in the last 6 months. From a submissive widow, willing to endure humiliation for a roof over her head, to an independent woman building her life on her own terms. Maybe Doris is right, and Howell and I do need a fresh start. After book club, I went back to my apartment and decided to do a little gardening. Each resident of Garden Terrace had a small plot to cultivate to their liking. I chose herbs and flowers: rosemary, thyme, lavender, calendula. Gardening has always calmed me, allowed me to put my thoughts in order. As I dug in the soil, I noticed Sylvia, a new resident, who had moved in only a week ago, approaching me. She was in her 70s, a widow like most of us, but unlike many of us, she retained a keen interest in life and a sharp mind. "It's a beautiful garden, Pearl," she said, stopping beside me. "I've always wanted to grow herbs, but never had the time to learn how." "It's not that hard," I smiled. "If you want, I can show you the basics. Rosemary and thyme are pretty unpretentious." "I'd love to," Sylvia brightened up. "Maybe tomorrow? I'll bring tea and cookies." "Okay." I nodded, feeling a warm feeling inside. Another friendship, another connection in my new life. That evening, getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Wrinkles, gray hair, hands covered in age spots. But my eyes had changed. There was a sparkle in them that hadn't been there before, a confidence I'd lost since Albert's death. I turned 79 in May, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. I had a job that brought not only money, but fulfillment. I had friends with whom I could discuss books, share thoughts, just enjoy each other's company. I had my own home, albeit small but cozy, and most importantly, my own, where no one moved my things or criticized my habits. I didn't know what the future would bring. Would my relationship with Howell be restored, or would this crack prove too deep? How many more years I would work at the school before my health wouldn't allow me to continue? How many new friends I would make and how many I would lose? At our age, death is a frequent visitor. But I knew one thing: I didn't regret my decision. I didn't regret filing a complaint about illegal construction. I didn't regret standing up for my principles, even at the cost of my relationship with my son, because that act brought me to a freedom I had never known before. Laurel and Howell chose their own path when they decided to build a home on deceit, when they allowed themselves to disrespect their elders, when they put material values above human relationships. I simply made them face the consequences of their choices. And maybe that was the best thing I could have done for my son. Because judging from our conversation last night, he was finally starting to realize that actions have consequences and that principles are more important than comfort. I lay in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of Garden Terrace. The muffled voices from the neighboring apartments, the rustling of the trees outside the window, the distant barking of the dog. My new life. My freedom. At 79, I had finally found myself, and it was a wonderful feeling,